Okay, sí.
¿Quieres un
No, pero
¿Quieres
sí,
un
ya
PowerPoint?
está, creo que ya está puesto ya.
Ah, okay.
So yo puedo leer desde allí, ¿verdad?
Okay, I will ask for help because I don't know how to do that at all. All right. Good morning. I'm Cindy Arnson, Director of the Latin American Program. Pleasure to see you on this cold and relatively dark November morning. Aside from the occasional news article about the decline of the Venezuelan economy, Venezuela has largely disappeared from media coverage in the United States. Thousands of protesters are no longer clashing with government troops and pro-government militias, as occurred earlier this year when there were massive street demonstrations throughout Venezuela that left over 40 people dead and scores, if not hundreds, injured. Several thousand people were jailed at that time, some of them subject to harsh treatment and abuse while in prison. Approximately 70 protesters remain in jail, and many more face prosecution. The most prominent of these prisoners is opposition leader Leopoldo López, who is currently in solitary confinement. The underlying problems that gave rise to the protests that started in February remain and in many ways have become more entrenched and difficult to address. The fall in global oil prices has deepened Venezuela's economic crisis, which is already marked, as we know, by shortages of basic goods, soaring inflation that is one of the highest rates in the entire world, and growing poverty. The Chinese government has extended billions of dollars in loans in exchange for oil deliveries, but it is rumored that now even the Chinese government has become wary of extending further credit. The approval ratings of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro have fallen precipitously since earlier in the year and are at an all-time low. To add to these difficulties, political polarization remains deep, the power of the armed forces has increased, and the opposition itself has fragmented over the best ways to confront the regime. Last month, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detentions condemned the continued incarceration of opposition leader Leopoldo López, and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights called for his release. Today, to discuss what is going on in Venezuelan politics, we have two distinguished panelists, Carlos Vecchio from Venezuela, Venezuelan lawyer and politician, a co-founder of the NGO Ciudadanía Activa, and the former presidential campaign manager for Leopoldo López in the primaries in 2011. He graduated from Georgetown University, from Harvard in 2001. His email is from Yale, so I assume that there's an ongoing relationship, and Carlos is living now in the United States and continues as an activist in the Venezuelan political scene. We're also joined remotely by Jennifer McCoy, who I hope, there she is, she can hear me in real time. She is a distinguished university professor of political science at Georgia State University and director of the Carter Center's Americas program. She is a specialist on democratization, but I think in the United States there are a few people who can claim to have the expertise that Jennifer has on Venezuela, the author of several full-length books and a frequent visitor to Caracas and other places in the country on behalf of the Carter Center and on behalf of electoral monitoring. So we will start with Carlos's presentation, then we will have Jennifer talk more broadly about what is going on in Venezuelan politics, and then we'll be pleased to take your questions. Thank you. Carlos, por favor. Yes, wherever you're comfortable.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank Cynthia for this invitation to talk about Venezuela, to give you an update about Venezuela. Every time that I have a talk in English, I sent a message, or I would say a warning to the audience. And the warning is the following. Don't think that the way I speak in English is the way I think in Spanish. So, with this warning, I would like to go through the presentation in the following way. First, I want to give you brief ideas about the context. I think Cindy made a wonderful summary of the Venezuelan situation, but I want to highlight some aspect of this context. Second, I want to just also highlight important events that have happened since the protest until now. And at the end, I want to give you a summary, a conclusion that I call what's next in Venezuela. I'll give you potential scenarios that I see as a politician, as a Venezuelan. So let's move forward. And the first slide that I want to just give you as a brief comment is why we were protesting at the beginning of this year. Cindy made a clear statement. The Venezuelan people were on the street because of economic, social, and political problems. And I remember that I had a conversation with Leopoldo at the beginning of this year in which we were discussing about the Venezuelan situation. We ended 2013 having the highest inflation in the world, and this year will be also the highest in the world. 2013 for the Venezuelan was the most violent year in our history. 25 homicides. And
25,000.
yeah, 25,000, yes, correct. So as you can see, we are facing difficult times. And I said to Leopoldo, we cannot stay silent as a political leaders. We need to urge Venezuelan people to protest in favor of their rights, to defend their rights. I don't feel well just keeping silent while we are seeing, all what was happening in Venezuela. And we decided to go to the street to talk with the people and telling them the crisis that we were facing, who was the responsible of that crisis, and also we add that we needed to find a way within the Constitution in order to resolve the crisis. That's why we were protesting in Venezuela. So if we look the next slide, the question was how Maduro reacted before the crisis or before the protest. So we had the most brutal repression in our modern history. And I want to point out this, the brutal repression. We didn't have the opportunity to see this before in Venezuela. Now we are facing this in the 21st century. Cindy made a wonderful summary of this. More than 3,000 detentions, close to 2,000 open criminal trials. And I want to highlight something right here because you see the number, but behind that number, we have a lot of people who have, I would say, difficult limitation on their rights. For example, those people cannot talk about their cases publicly. They cannot go to the street to protest. They cannot talk about politics. They cannot tweet. They have limitations, severe limitation on their basic rights. So that's why I wanted to highlight this number. 34 people remains detained, more than 150 cases of tortures. 2 mayors were illegally removed and detained. Leopoldo López is detained, and a Congresswoman, Maria Corina Machado, was illegally removed from Congress, and now she has a limitation to leave the country. What was the message from the government? The message was so clear. If you go to the street and if you want to protest, I want to put you in jail. I want to repress you. And I sent a message to ordinary people, to the students, to the mayors, to the political leaders, and to the congressmen. I want to just enforce a terror policy against the Venezuelan people, because they know the problem that we are facing, that those problems will be worse in the future, so and they need to preserve people just silent, without moving, feeling, that they could be punished if they do something against the government. So let's move now. What has happened since then until now, since February? The economic and social and political crisis has worsened, and it will be even more severe in 2015. The inflation will be worse, the scarcity problem as well, and also the violence. So what we will see in the future, especially in 2015, will be even worse than we saw just in the beginning of this year. Next one, repression has increased, hasn't stopped. If you go to the street, they will send immediately not only military force, but also the police force and the militia. Civilian people armed by their own government. The torture and violence of human rights continue, especially with the people who have been detained, the cases of Leopoldo, the students, mayors. We had a dialogue without result. In my view, it was a tool in which the government used in order to misguide the national and international community. We had a resignation of one of the most important people inside of the government, Jordani. He was a very close friend of Chavez, and he was handling the economic and the planification ministry in the last 14, 15 years. The most important human rights organizations and also the United Nations has requested the release of Leopoldo. Leopoldo has been isolated and tortured. You can read there that excrement and urine have been thrown into his cell, and they cut the light and the water inside his cell, so in order to torture him. The process of getting a new electoral branch and judges of the Supreme Court is ongoing, and the government is manipulating this and is controlling this process. The Special Congress Commission has not issued any report about the investigation of the protest. So there is no impartial investigation about regarding the protest. 90% of the deaths, hasn't been investigated, and none of the torture cases have been investigated. So that's the current situation. Also, there is another important element in order to make the conclusion, is that the government decided to remove Rodriguez Torre, the person who was in charge of the interior minister, handling all the police force in Venezuela, especially at the time of the protests. The oil prices keep falling, and 2 days ago, Maduro enacted 28 enabling laws without participation and discussion with the society. This law, in our view, won't resolve the problem and will cause the increase of the inflation, recession, and it's going to be, it has been, in my view, an element that will add an additional problem to Venezuela. So let me give you just a brief numbers about the polls. This was the last poll that I saw. As you can see, how people evaluate the situation of Venezuela, and 82% considers that the situation in Venezuela is negative. So the other one is how the Venezuelans evaluate Maduro. Close to 70% disapproves Maduro's administration. If we see the other slide, if you ask the Venezuelan if they are pro-opposition or pro-government, we find that 38% considers that they are part of the opposition, they are pro-opposition. This is the first number that I see in the last 15 years in which the opposition is bigger than the block of the pro-government supporter. So that element also is very important. So let's give you just the conclusion, the summary. What's next? Country environment and Maduro's regime. The country and Maduro are not the same since February. As you can see, and as I explained to you, the political situation in Venezuela is going to be worse, especially the economic situation, and Maduro is weaker than it was in February. So I'm expecting a social conflictivity for next year. A friend of mine, he's in the audience, told me last night, something's going to snap in Venezuela. He used that expression. And I think, yes. I don't find any element at this moment in time that tells me that the things in Venezuela are going to be better. No. Will be even worse in Venezuela. So I'm expecting that social conflictivity. What I see is a perfect storm in the following sense. We have economic problems, as I said, problem of scarcity and inflation, social problem, especially the violence, and political problem. Maduro doesn't have the charisma, doesn't have the leadership in order to handle the situation. And in my view, there is a division inside of the government and inside of the official political party. So we have that, explosive cocktail in Venezuela. So I'm expecting that something's going to happen, socially speaking, especially in the beginning of the next year as well. People talk always about economic problem, and that, in my view, is a huge problem. I would say the main problem right now for Venezuelans. But we need to add something else in this equation, which is the lack of leadership of Maduro. In my view, right now, they don't have the capability to handle the situation, technically and politically. They don't have the right people to handle this situation, economically speaking. But Maduro doesn't have the charisma, doesn't have the leadership inside of his political party to handle the situation. And that, in my view, will will add an additional element in this equation in order to consider that the situation is going to be worse for 2015. So there is now a clear majority that recognizes the crisis. People from the government, official supporters, now say that Maduro is not doing well, that they don't trust in Maduro, and it's a clear majority who is recognizing this crisis. So we could say the following. That's my vision on this. In my view, Venezuela is already in a transition. And we can, we can just see three potential scenarios. One, the government knowing that the situation is going to be worse, they will be more repressive. Or probably they could combine being, more repressive and just try to open the economy, just close to the China model. Or the scenario that I think is going to happen, it will be a transition to restore democracy or to restore the democratic coexistence among Venezuelans. I think Venezuelan society is changing. It's sending a lot of messages to us since at least last year, in which we had a presidential election against Maduro. In our view, we won that elections, and that's why I said that Venezuelan people is looking for something else, for something new. They knew that this government won't solve their main problems, and they are looking for an alternative right now. The protests also highlighted what I'm saying, and the recent polls also say that. So Venezuelan society is moving, is looking something else. In my view, is again a democratic coexistence among Venezuela. And in my view, that's the scenario that is going to prevail in the near future. We cannot forget that the official political party, the Chavismo, is still a political force. We cannot take out that out of the equation. We need to understand that they are part of the country, that we need to get together in order to restore what I call democratic coexistence, to move forward as a country, united. There is a discussion inside of Chavismo, inside of PSUV, right now. They know that they cannot continue with Maduro in power because he's not able to handle the situation. They have been discussing how can they just remove Maduro and preserve the power. They are in that discussion right now, internally. They haven't discussed that publicly, but they are doing that inside of the official political party. But at the same time, Cuba knows that. Cuba knows that. And Cuba knows that the oil prices went down and that Venezuela cannot provide more oil in the way they are doing right now. And that's why, Cuba is looking for the European Union and is looking again for lifting the embargo from the US. They know that, and they have been thinking about that as well. So we need to ask the following: dialogue with the government, with Maduro, or the dialogue is with the Chavismo, the democratic Chavismo, or with both? Somebody could say, well, you need to talk with Maduro because he's in power. That's right. But also, the political force is the Chavismo, and the Chavismo is moving. The Chavismo, in my view, doesn't recognize Maduro as the unique leader. So something is happening there. So we need to approach, in our view, dialogue with the Chavismo, because, as I said, it's an important force in Venezuela. So in 2015, are we going to have congressional election? Or maybe presidential election? Or maybe constitutional assembly? So I'm expecting an electoral scenario next year that could be not only congressional election. That's a potential scenario that we could face next year due to the social, political, economic crisis, and because, in my view, the Chavismo is divided and don't trust anymore on Maduro. From the opposition point of view, well, I forgot to tell this. We have to take in consideration that in this moment, all the opposition leaders are more popular than Maduro. Leopoldo López is on the top, then Capriles, but it's clear that the opposition leaders now are more popular than any public officer in Venezuela. Something that I have found in the last months here, internationally speaking, is that the international community is more clear about what is happening in Venezuela, and they know about the violation of human rights, and they understand that we need to find, as a Venezuelan, a way to get together in order to move forward as a country. Let me just say something before moving forward. I am totally agree with the dialogue. I think that is part of the democratic society. But we have to learn from the experiences, and we need a dialogue with result. We need to put in a clear agenda with a timing in order to get a result which help the Venezuelan people. So you cannot sit with the government without any agenda, without any time frame, without any guideline in order to find solution for the Venezuelan crisis. So let's move forward. So from the opposition point of view, I will highlight the following. We have a challenge ahead to become an alternative and to consolidate the majority that we are seeing in Venezuela right now. There is a huge opportunity. Venezuelan people is looking for an alternative. It's there. So our challenge will be how can we consolidate that, and how can we transform that potential benefit that we have in a real majority that support the opposition. As we saw, 80% considers that the situation in Venezuela is negative, but that doesn't mean that they will support immediately the opposition. So we have a huge opportunity there. We have the challenge to preserve the unitary coalition. I know that there have been a lot of discussion about the division inside of the opposition. I would say that there is no division inside of the opposition. I've been there for the last 5 years. We have differences. We have that. Huge differences among us. And that's the way it should be. And that's fine. That's pluralism. We confront our ideas publicly. And it's not the first time that something like that happened. We have had that in the past. And we have discussed our differences in public without putting in risk the opposition and the unitary platform. But at the end of the day, when we have to take the decisions, we put first Venezuela, we put first the situation that we are facing, and we just find and reach the points that we consider are common among us. So what is happening right now is the same thing. The different approaches that we have seen from the different side of the opposition, in my view, they could coexist together. And we need to wait until certain events come in order to take or target one objective as an opposition. But in the meantime, we can run with all the approaches together because they can coexist, and that doesn't mean that we are divided, although the government wants to highlight that division. So we need to build bridges with the Chavismo Democrático. There is no possible transition in Venezuela without the Chavismo Democrático, with democratic Chavismo. We need to understand that. They are part of the country. They have a plan about Venezuela. So we need to get together and just find how can we build a country together with their ideas, our ideas, and just move forward. So that, in my view, is very important because we are looking for a smooth transition in Venezuela. That won't happen if we don't get in contact with the democratic Chavismo. As I said before, any dialogue requires the release of political prisoners and a clear agenda in order to obtain results. Something that we need to keep in mind. It's impossible to take out of the equation the discussion about the Venezuelan crisis. We need to continue that discussion because it's going to be worse next year. We need to tell the people about the crisis. We need to tell the people that Maduro is responsible for the crisis, and we need to tell the people that they don't know how to solve, and that's why we need to find a way within the Constitution, peacefully, a way out for this crisis. In any electoral scenario, I don't have any doubt, and I'm fully confident about this, that the opposition will present a unitary platform of candidates. So that's what I see in the future, and I'm happy to discuss with you about this presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Jennifer.
All right, so the sound still good?
Sound is good, thanks.
All right. Well, thanks for inviting me to join you. Hello to Carlos and Cindy and to the rest of you. I'd like to take a longer look, first as a scholar and as an outsider to Venezuela, so I will take a different perspective than Carlos as a political actor and Venezuelan citizen. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to think about the current situation in the historical context of Venezuela, because of course the country has always ridden the petroleum wave with associated political and economic volatility. And if we just think about the democratic period since the 1960s, in broad terms of each decade, we see that there really has been a lot of change and periods of instability. The 1960s themselves, the first decade of democracy, faced a guerrilla insurgency. The 1970s, of course, were the boom years, big growth of middle class. The 1980s were wavering, with petroleum prices wavering, debt growing, leading to the 1990s, which were extremely volatile, with attempted coups and impeachment. And I think if we go back and remember, at one point, inflation reaching 100%, and poverty rising to 65%. So the conditions were there at that time for a strong leader or a strong man to fill the vacuum, and Hugo Chavez came to the fore at that point. In the 15 years that he was in power, of course, Venezuela also went through some of the lowest and the highest petroleum prices in its history. And throughout that, Chavez worked to impose his vision, as it evolved over that time, for the country, and also dealt with a great deal of volatility. Since his death in 2013, we've seen the country trying to regroup politically and to recover from an economic legacy of debt-financed public spending that particularly grew during the electoral periods, which were frequent in the country. So we see this attempt to regroup, I think, is what we've been witnessing for the last year and a half, but also a continued need to recover from the polarization and the divisions and the resentment and distrust that still exists among Venezuelans. So at this point, the future is very uncertain, I would say. And I almost look at it like the world after the Cold War period, when the Soviet Union dissolved, and the bipolar structure that was contentious and conflictive, but gave rule to the game, that everyone knew how the game was played. After that, after 1990, the world has faced a very different period, with, for a while, the United States as the main power, but after that, with many actors, both state and non-state actors emerging, and new rules of the game trying to emerge, but without consolidation. So I think this is happening in Venezuela as Venezuelans try to contend with a situation of multiple areas, arenas of power, multiple interests, multiple factions within all of the political groups and economic groups, and trying to move their way through this period. Obviously, Nicolás Maduro, since he became president last year, has been trying to consolidate his own leadership within Chavismo. He's given signals at times that he wanted to deal with the economic crisis, perhaps through moderating some of the economic policies, but has apparently not felt sure enough to do so. And instead of some of the needed economic adjustments that would cause pain, the very recent moves have been towards more controls and policies like a repeat of the Christmas bonanza from last year of mandating price controls, particularly for goods and toys that will be popular around the Christmas holidays. Now with the upcoming elections in 2015 for the National Assembly, we'll have to wait and see, but it's possible that significant economic adjustment may be delayed until after those elections. The opposition is still regrouping as well, not only from the elections of 2013, but from the divergence in the strategies that they chose early this year, where one strategy was to build a term electoral base moving toward the National Assembly elections next year. And another strategy was a shorter term strategy that Carlos Vecchio just described of the demonstrating the impatience and the frustration with the economic and social and political conditions that did lead people to the streets. So for short term, I'll just say an electoral strategy in the medium term and a street strategy in the short term to put pressure on the government for change. So where does that leave Venezuela? Venezuela has faced stressful situations in the past. As I described, the 1990s were quite stressful. The period of 2002 to 2003 under Chavez were quite stressful, volatile, with high potential for violent conflict. The country has gotten through, not without paying cost, but has gotten through and without extreme violence. What are we facing today? Is there anything different about this situation? There are a few things that I think we should note that are somewhat different. One is the scarcity of goods. I haven't seen such a scarcity of goods in Venezuela, or a country that is not facing an economic embargo, before. And obviously during the petroleum strike in 2002-2003, there was a short-term shortage. But this is a long-term structural issue that is new, I think, for the country. A second thing that seems different, or at least more exaggerated, is judicial improvisation that is threatening due process. We heard the presentation from Cindy and from Carlos about the current situation resulting from the protests. But I want to point out what some people may not be aware of, that particularly have to do with the two mayors who were in jail, who were imprisoned on the basis of a one-day examination by the Supreme Court when they were called for on the basis of basically contempt for not carrying out a Supreme Court order to stop the roadblocks in their cities, and detained on that very day and sentenced to different periods in prison. Now, both of those mayors are also facing other accusations and trials for other charges. But that case of imprisoning them based on an audience of one day in front of the Supreme Court, I have not seen before. And I think that we do need to be concerned about due process in the cases of all of those that continue to be detained, and also concerns about the treatment they are receiving in prison today. I think a third thing is this strong sense of uncertainty with the factionalization within the various groupings and centers of power that I had mentioned previously. That is somewhat new for Venezuela. And I think we can look at the interests and within each group. Obviously, within Chavismo, there are contending points of view. And if we break them down, I think it's more complex than simply radicals and moderates, which is sometimes presented. But there are those who do carry an ideological commitment to the kind of changes that they're trying to achieve. First, I want to speak at the elite level. So at the elite level within Chavismo, I think there are those with the ideological vision that they're trying to achieve. There are others who are more nationalist and perhaps most strongly within the military, but that also gives to some of the anti-imperialist message. And there are pragmatists, some of whom are simply beneficiaries from the regime, and some who are pragmatists looking at alternative methods to recuperate the economy. At the popular levels, within Chavismo. I think we can also see differences, but there's a very important base of support that also has an ideological bent, but that are really interested in deepening the democracy, really interested in ideas like the comunas, the communal proposals for new structures of power, very interested in pursuing new forms of participation. But there's also, I think, what's coming out in some of the discussions of the polls, this idea of a new subject, that is those who are interested in something like a social democratic vision for the country, who are still supporters of Chavismo, but interested in a social democratic direction. Within the opposition, we've already heard from Carlos about that. I think that those in the opposition, in the leadership, are still searching for a strategy, and that they will face a challenging period of primaries as we move toward the National Assembly elections. It will be challenging to choose candidates when there are competing political parties with their own interests to preserve their own positions within the country and moving toward the future. So that will be something to face as well. Now, what's coming up in the short term? The government has announced a large set of decree laws that represent the end of the enabling law, which is the law that Congress decrees to the president the ability to, or Congress delegates to the president the ability to decree laws. So that period is just now ending that Maduro was awarded. And so he did announce a large number of laws that have to do mostly with the economy, a little bit with the communal structure. Not all of them have been explained yet, so we're still waiting to see the full complement of those to see exactly what direction it will be going. He did mention in that there would be the approval to raise gasoline prices, but without naming a timetable yet. And that, of course, has been almost a taboo subject in the past in Venezuela, but is very sorely needed. And so I think that will be promising as one of the mechanisms needed to address the economic situation. Raising the gasoline prices that in Venezuela are, I believe, the most heavily subsidized in the world, and actually cost the government quite a bit of money just to provide its own domestic gasoline. The next thing that's coming up, Carlos mentioned briefly, but the National Assembly is in the process of choosing both judicial and electoral authorities to replace outgoing magistrates and rectors. For the electoral authority, 3 of the 5 rectors or directors within the National Electoral Council have expired terms more than a year ago, and they are moving quickly to try to replace those, possibly before Christmas or right after Christmas. This will be a very important move. There is a committee in the National Assembly that is mixed of opposition and government representatives and civil society members. And they're now taking nominations, which closed today, and they will have to assess the qualifications of those members, and then this committee that assesses the qualifications will present a group of those to the National Assembly from which to choose the 3. This will be extremely important for the National Assembly elections coming up next year in terms of giving legitimacy to those elections, giving trust, or reducing trust, depending on how the nominations are handled and how inclusive the resulting National Electoral Council will appear to the people of Venezuela. Another thing coming up in the short term to watch for, I would point out for the elections, in addition, on the electoral calendar, besides the National Assembly elections, which are not yet scheduled but will occur sometime in 2015, there is the possibility for recall movements at the governor and mayoral period, as recalls can happen halfway through terms for governors, representatives, and president. It's not just the presidential level. And so that will be coming up by the end of 2015. Presidential recall would be the possibility at the end of 3 years of Maduro's term. So that would be the end of 2016 or in 2017. And finally, the other short-term thing to continue to watch would obviously be oil prices. Will they stabilize at $75 where they are currently? Will they fall, or will they rise again moderately? This, of course, affects the economic maneuverability of the government. All right, so thinking about the future, it seems the reports that we've heard this morning, look very dismal. The overview that Cindy gave, the picture that we heard from Carlos, many reports that we get out of the country seem dismal. But I want to take stock of the capital that Venezuela has to move forward. What are the strengths? What are the positives that Venezuela has? Is it possible to overcome this current situation? And I want to point out some of those positives that I see in the country. First is that I believe, based on polls and based on historical experience, that the population views elections as the conflict management mechanism of choice. They believe in elections to resolve conflicts and disputes much more than violence or any other extra-constitutional move. And so I believe it is vital to try to strengthen the legitimacy of the electoral process. Second, I think that Venezuelans share a commitment and find shared values in the Constitution that they currently have, the 1999 Constitution. Many Venezuelans refer to that and the values that they see in that as a point of drawing together the country, a point from which they can work. Third, I find Venezuelans actually extremely adaptable to very difficult circumstances. Creative, they've overcome in the past strong conflicts and divisions, and I think that gives us hope and optimism that they could do so again. Fourth, I think there are shared values in the country. It looks like the country is extremely polarized, extremely divided with different visions for the future, and that is true. But there are also underlying shared values, in addition to those I mentioned on elections as a mechanism, on the values in the Constitution. I think we continue to see a commitment or a desire for a strong welfare state. I think that particularly the recent polls have also shown that Venezuelans do not want deeper controls, economic controls, price controls, etc. And I think that there also is a shared value of the need to protect the redistributive gains for the poor, or have the gains that they've won, which is partly through redistribution, and deeper participatory mechanisms for them. So I think that there is a basis for a shared future if Venezuelans can overcome the fear, particularly the fear of losing the gains for those who feel like they have made gains recently. And if those who are trying to preserve private gains that are more illegitimately won can be isolated. And if Venezuelans can start with a basic respect, one for the other as a citizen, as a fellow citizen, then I think that it is possible to find a roadmap to move forward and to begin to bring the country back together and address some of the many common and shared problems and regain the values that Venezuelans share. So I will stop there, trying to bring a little note of optimism to the discussion, but to say not so much optimism in terms of predicting any immediate solution or change, but in terms of saying there is a basis to move forward and to work together. I think it's not going to be easy. It will be a very complex roadmap, but it is not impossible. Thank you.
Great. Jennifer, thank you for those for those words of optimism, which I think are rare, and so it's very refreshing to hear. A sense of the commonalities and a basis for moving forward. I'd like to ask you, if I could, just a quick question, and Carlos, please jump in. If you could speak a little bit more about the process for nominating new members of the Electoral Council. Obviously, that's critical. There was an unprecedented questioning of the independence of the National Electoral Council at the time of the 2013 elections between Maduro and Capriles. And there was a sense that there were many claims of fraud in the election. And so the fact that there is a representative group looking to nominate the next electoral judges, I think is positive. I'd like you to say a little bit more about that. And then another question really for both of you has to do with, what forces exist in civil society, whether it's the church or other civic organizations that are serving or could serve as bridges. I mean, we hear a lot about the polarization of Venezuelan society, about, Chavismo versus the opposition and the various divisions, within. But who are the bridge builders? Who are the people, in society at large that are capable of overcoming some of these divisions? Carlos, if you want to start.
Yes, regarding the first one about the electoral process to elect the new members of the electoral branch, I think this is going to be a very key point in the near future. I just agree with Jennifer that Venezuelans have the culture of resolve our problem through elections. I don't have any doubt, and that's the way must be. And that's something that we need to preserve in Venezuela. All the Venezuela have to be looking this point, and also the international community. So what we have seen so far is that this committee, who is in the process to pre-select the candidates in order to then present them before the National Assembly, has been controlled by the government. And there is one element that now is sending a warning to this election. Recently, the president of the National Assembly, Diosdado Cabello, said the following. Just before I give you this information, I need to point out that in order to elect the new members of the electoral branch, the National Assembly needs a qualified majority in order to elect those members. The government doesn't have that majority in the National Assembly. They need to reach an agreement with the opposition inside of the Congress. But Cabello said the following: if we don't reach this agreement, we will go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will elect those members of the electoral branch. They did that in the past. They elected, to give you an example, Jorge Rodriguez. He was the head of the electoral branch. That person was vice president. When he left the electoral branch, he was vice president, and now currently he's a mayor of one of the most important cities, Caracas. So, as you saw, I mean, put that election in the Supreme Court won't give the support of the new electoral branch, and that will be a bad message for the Venezuelan and for the election to come. So that's why, for example, in my view, if you ask me, you want a dialogue with the government? Okay, yes. One of the points should be the electoral branch. Let's choose together an electoral branch in which all the Venezuelans can trust. I am not asking to choose an electoral branch for the opposition. No, I'm asking to have an electoral branch that all Venezuelans can trust, because it's the only way that we can preserve the election process as a way to resolve peacefully our problems. Otherwise, they will be stimulating different things, and we need to avoid that as a Venezuelan. So this element will be a key element for the future of Venezuela, and it will take place the next month in December. The second one was regarding,
Who are the bridge builders?
I would say, the church, the Catholic Church. They could work with the opposition and the government in order to find a solution, and also the international community. But as I said again, it's not only about the mediators, it's not about that, it's also about the results. You need to have a clear agenda to find a result for the Venezuelans. So if you don't have that clear, doesn't matter who will be, the mediator, who will be the person in charge of, to build the bridges between the opposition and the government. So it's quite important having those people, but at the same time, having a clear agenda with a result for the Venezuelans. Okay?
Jennifer, go ahead.
Yeah, just to give a few more points on the process for choosing the electoral authorities. It is, first, the requirements are that they be professional, that they have certain professional characteristics, university degree, 10 years of professionalism, hopefully with electoral experience. Second, that they have no partisan ties. Third, that they have no ties to the president of the country, blood, family tie. And Venezuela moved to this model of having in the Constitution, having a professional and independent electoral authority after 1998. Before that, it was to be explicit party representatives. So there are two different kinds of models that countries choose. Venezuela chose this model. Now, obviously, in the reality, the perception of those who have been chosen has been that it has been dominated by government partisan people. And so the challenge this time is to see if this nominating committee will put forth a slate of candidates from which the National Assembly will choose 3 plus their alternates to fill these slots. The time frame then will be that yes, it does require the 2/3 vote in the National Assembly. Coming out of the committee itself, the committee made a decision that on their own internal regulations that they will choose them by a simple majority within the committee, the slate of candidates that will come out. So that could be chosen just by the government. But if it gets to the National Assembly and no decision can be made with the 2/3 vote required, then it could go to the Supreme Court. I will point out that the last time when the Supreme Court intervened in 2003 is when they named the Electoral Court Council. At that time, it was a different situation. There were actual vacancies on the Electoral Council. There were no people sitting in the seats. And when the National Assembly couldn't decide, the Supreme Court had to step in because otherwise they couldn't have moved forward with the recall referendum process or any future elections. This time, there are people sitting in the seat, and the Supreme Court already decided that those people, even though their terms have expired, can stay until the new people are chosen. So it's a slightly different situation, and it is the National Assembly's responsibility to choose these magistrates rather than the Supreme Court's responsibility. In terms of bridges, there are people who are bridges in the country. There are members of the church who have tried to be bridges. There are business people. There are some media personalities. There are people who can serve as interlocutors and liaisons. What I have seen happen structurally in any kind of conflict is that radical voices on both sides usually drown out moderate voices trying to work together. And oftentimes those who are trying to build bridges, trying to be the interlocutors, will be disparaged or seen as or painted as traitors to the cause on either side, and it makes it more difficult to do so. Therefore, I think that Venezuela is going to need the help of third parties, of outsiders to help to draw this roadmap, to bring them together, to get together. They had started in that process with UNASUR, the South American Union, last year, and with the support of the Vatican, of representatives of the Vatican. And so that is probably the mechanism to continue to move forward with that kind of help.
Sure. I think
Just
sure,
I
go
want
ahead.
to add one comment. That decision to put in the Supreme Court the final decision in order to elect the members of the electoral branch if the Congress doesn't get an agreement, in my view, is unconstitutional. I mean, you cannot read that inside of our Constitution and within the spirit of our Constitution. They found a way to keep the control over the electoral branch. So it's unacceptable that they decided to choose the Supreme Court in order to elect the members. And they don't interpret the Constitution, the Supreme Court. In my view, all the time they are rewriting the Constitution. You know, they are putting words that the Constitution doesn't say in order to preserve power and to control the different branches in Venezuela. And they found this way to keep the control at that time. And they are trying to do the same thing. So when we see this, we need to warn you that this is not a constitutional process. And in a democratic country, you need to reach an agreement inside of the Congress to give legitimacy to that branch. That's the rationality behind that. That's why you don't elect in an electoral process the member of the electoral branch. You look through the National Assembly, which has legitimacy in order to elect those branches. But if you put that decision in 7 judges from the Supreme Court, that is not the spirit of our Constitution and when we discuss these provisions and the reason why we changed our electoral branch in Venezuela. So I wanted to point out this issue.
Great,
Okay,
thanks.
thank you.
I have lots more questions, but I want to open it up to yours. And while people decide who wants to raise a hand, I see a couple already. I'd simply like to thank the other members of the Latin American Program team, Christine Zeno, Alejandra Argueta here in the auditorium, as well as Veronica Colon and Eric Olson, who are, I think, watching remotely but not with us. Please identify yourselves and ask a question or make a comment. We'll start with Wendy, then Abe, then this gentleman in the back. We'll take a first round, and then I'll come to you.
Hi, Wendy Lewis. I'm vice chair of the Latin American program here with Cindy, and my husband was the American ambassador to Venezuela. So I would like to take this a little broader. Jennifer, you're the head of the Americas program at the Carter Center, and the response of the region has been deplorable. There was no opposition in any way, really, in the United Nations to Venezuela with it taking its seat at the Security Council because the bloc of Latin American countries, and I'm talking about people that do not receive Venezuelan oil, who do not have any kind of, and so I would like to hear from both of you, if I can, what kinds of plans can be made to get, at the very least, the Pacific Alliance members to be involved. Number 2, I spent a day with listening to analysts in New York about the economic situation in general, and specifically about the fact that Canadian heavy oil has completely replaced Venezuelan heavy oil. So as oil goes down to $70 a barrel, and it's not only that Maduro cannot provide oil to Ecuador and to Cuba, but it is the most serious crisis because PDVSA can no longer be his private bank. And therefore, how do you see this affecting the already terrible situation in scarcity with the population that you talked about, Jennifer, about how it's so important for those who have gained through the handouts of the government, not seeing that they're losing their gains. They're losing them every day because the economy is dreadful and it's going to get worse. And thirdly, the production of oil in that country cannot even be effective. It's down to what, 15% of what it was before? Because the heavy oil can only be refined outside of the country. It doesn't have the capacity, and they've thrown out the best places. I'm sorry to make this so long, but they're the serious questions. The brain drain. The brain drain is huge. Leo and all of the others that have stayed when they could have left are heroes in my vision. But the brain drain means that you're talking about a lowering literacy rate, less educated population. How does that affect the electoral process? And how many people actually vote?
Okay. Christine, we'll take Abe. Wait for the microphone. Yeah, go ahead.
That was such a challenging set of questions. Wouldn't you rather handle that first?
I'll take a round, I think. I mean, I think people can take notes and come back to a number of points. Go ahead.
Well, I want to take the discussion in a very different direction. I have just finished a project with Sergio Bitar, known to many of you, the former minister in 3 different Chilean governments. We were commissioned by the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, International IDEA in Stockholm, to do a series of interviews with former presidents and prime ministers in 9 different countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Europe, who have played leading roles in managing transitions from authoritarian governance to democracy. In each of the cases we looked at, these were relatively successfully completed transitions which have not been reversed since they occurred. They are, of course, very different cases, and this is not the time to try to present a summary of the cases or our conclusions. But listening to particularly Carlos's presentation, but also Jennifer's excellent briefing, Carlos put the whole question in the context of transitions and really framed it in those terms. We looked at a variety of different transitions from different kinds of authoritarian regimes to somewhat different democratic outcomes. And they are very different, but there are a series of recurrent challenges, and we found some commonalities among these cases that I think it came to mind listening particularly to Carlos's presentation that they might be very relevant to the Venezuelan situation. Fear, which Jennifer mentioned, pervasive fear was a common element in many of these situations. Repression and violations of human rights, a common element. These are not unique to Venezuela in any way, and in fact, the degree of repression and the degree of fear in many of these other situations were, you know, in a scale of unpleasantness, even more and much more unpleasant. In terms of the strategy of the opposition, which was one of the most interesting parts of Carlos's presentation, if I understood correctly your point of view, it was that there are a variety of opposition groups with differing views and differing priorities, and that there's no reason to try to reconcile those at this stage, but rather let the 100 flowers bloom, waiting for some particular event or context to detonate a coming together around a particular moment. Interestingly, in many of the cases we looked at, there were precisely this kind of pluralist opposition. And a very important role by political leadership, Aylwin and others in Chile, Ulisses Guimarães and Cardoso and others in Brazil, Mandela and his group with the ANC in South Africa and so on, who did a very skillful job of sublimating the differences and concentrating on those issues that would provide an unbeatable coalition for the transition, not yet for all of the different socioeconomic policies. And in doing that, they took difficult decisions I mean, for example, just to limit myself to one, in our interview with Cardoso, he talked about the massive campaign for direct elections in Brazil. There were demonstrations of hundreds of thousands of people in the major Brazilian cities calling for direct elections. Cardoso's view at the time, very influential in how it worked out, was, you know, the Brazilian military is too frightened of direct elections, and it's too much of a risk for them. Of course we would prefer direct elections, but let's sublimate that, even though many of our most motivated colleagues are in favor of that, and concentrate on the indirect elections, which is the little space that they give us, see what we can do along those lines. Let's surround the fortress, as he put it at the time, and wait until those inside who really understand why they have to build bridges come out and build the bridges, rather than thinking that they can be kind of bludgeoned into it. So I'm wondering whether there are lessons to be learned from some of these other situations that might be valuable in the context of. It seems to me that you build an electoral coalition in any situation, Venezuela or anywhere else, by accumulating all of the different causes that you might attract people to. I mean, some people are mostly interested in economic things, some people in identity things, ethnic, and so on, so you can build all of that. But you build a coalition for moving the needle on transition. And you were talking about conciliators and bridge builders. I think another very important aspect of this, and I'll close with that, is in addition to those pragmatists on both sides, the opposition and the repressive regime, that are looking for ways to get beyond the impasse, there are also very important sectors that are not particularly active politically, but have made their peace with and are comfortable with the authoritarian regime to a certain level. But as they see the situation unfolding, they may defect and switch their not so activist or visible but important loyalties to the transition makers. And I think people in the business communities in South Africa, in Brazil, and in a number of other countries played that role, and that becomes very important as the people inside the authoritarian regime see those pillars of support drifting in the other direction.
Thanks, Abe, and we'll take this one last comment back here and come back to the panelists. There.
Thank you. Chris Hernandez-Roy from the OAS. I just have two, maybe perhaps blunt questions. Carlos Vecchio, the last thing he was talking about was basically the government's desire to hang on to power. He was mentioning that in the context of hanging on to the electoral authority or influence over the electoral authority and using creative interpretations of the Constitution through the Supreme Court to do so. If polling trends that we're seeing now...
Chris, if you could move the microphone closer, there you go.
If polling trends continue, the ones that we're seeing now, or if they get worse, is there a threat that the legislative elections, which, as has been pointed out, have not yet been scheduled, although they're supposed to be held by the end of the year, is there a threat that they could be delayed or worse? And my second question is, Carlos's presentation mentioned the possibility of having not only the legislative elections, which again need to take place or are theoretically are supposed to take place at the end of next year, but he mentioned the possibility of perhaps having a presidential election or a constituent assembly. And those are obviously not contemplated under the Constitution. And in what kind of a scenario does he envisage those additional electoral events possibly taking place? Thank you.
Great. Okay, we've had three very sort of meaty questions and comments having to do with the economy, the role of oil, the brain drain, the elements of a transition in other contexts, and now the role of the international community in continuing to play a role in Venezuela. I think Carlos addressed some of those comments earlier, and Chris's question about the possible delay of an election in 2015. So this time, let's start with Jennifer. You can take those in whatever order you'd like. Why don't you start, and we'll come back to Carlos.
Okay, well, yeah, there's certainly a lot there. Going back to Wendy's questions, the response of the region, actually I would say that the concern of the region was evident in UNASUR's first meeting on this subject, which led to the proposal coming out of UNASUR for a dialogue last spring. And so rather than simply a resolution of support for the government, which is what often happens with organizations that are representing executives, such as UNASUR and the OAS and others, there actually was a proposal for a dialogue with the opposition that did start last spring. So I think that there is a concern in the region about the Venezuelan situation that involves both the possibility of any kind of severe instability, spilling over borders, affecting the rest of the region, as well as now UNASUR has put its name on the line to help with the dialogue. There's a bit of a reputational issue as well. So I think that there will be some interest within UNASUR to continue to push for or support the idea of a dialogue. But other than that, it is generally, we do see Latin American organizations, as I said, that are made of executives, basically supporting executives. We see a strong response to coups, attempted coups. We see less of a response when it comes to either disputes between branches of government or complaints of citizens against their own governments. That's where we see very little response from the hemisphere. In terms of the economy and what's going to happen and the brain drain, the oil issue is very interesting, and it isn't just the Canadian heavy oil. Of course, the Keystone Pipeline is not yet in place, which I think is supposed to help bring some of that oil out of Canada, but also the fracking within the United States. As I understand it, and I'm not an oil expert, but as prices continue to go down, that might make the fracking too expensive to continue, because that's another expensive form of producing oil. And that in turn would then have another reverse impact on supply. The additional oil produced by the United States has helped to increase supply and therefore helped to decrease prices of oil. If the decline continues such that it's too expensive to continue with the fracking and therefore then supply lessens and prices start to go up, then that can change the situation. So it seems like in the future we may be seeing, a volatile, search for an equilibrium among all these different sources of producing oil. Venezuela in there, one very important brain drain was after the 2003 petroleum strike, when Chavez at that point did fire the skilled capacity, the managers and the workers who had participated in that strike, and many of them went to Colombia, helped to start the Colombian, to strengthen the Colombian oil production. and went to other countries. And so that was an important brain drain at that time. And of course, others are immigrating now. And in terms of, well, actually, I think I should just stop there. Abe's comments were fascinating. I think that's sort of a longer discussion, but I think I'll let Carlos respond to those provocative ideas, and Chris's question about the scenarios for the elections that Carlos, but I think that's directed to Carlos. In terms of could elections be delayed? Yes, there's always the possibility that elections could be delayed, but I don't expect them to be. I expect there's a stronger likelihood that they would be held at some point. The question is the timing, and as in any country, you know, political calculations will be strong in terms of trying to predict the best timing for those who can influence that decision.
Carlos.
Well, about the region, Wendy, I think we need more solidarity from the Latin American countries. I'm not talking about just only organizations. I'm talking about governments. I'm talking about parliaments. When you see a violation of human rights against the people, in this case Venezuela, you need to send a clear message internationally. That won't be acceptable. You can support Maduro if you want, but when we are talking about a violation of human rights, you have to be there, and you have to speak up, especially Latin American countries who have faced, difficult times with dictatorships last in the past. So the UNASUR, in my view, as I said, I think Maduro played with them, because they said a dialogue, but we didn't find any solution for the Venezuelan. The crisis is still there, so it didn't work. So you need to transform that and really be a mediator between the opposition and the government. The way they did it didn't work. And organizations such as UNASUR has to be very clear on that. You need to protect not a government. You need to protect the people, the Venezuelan people. So that's why they need to find a way to reach an agreement between the opposition and the government, and to stop what I think is an authoritarian regime. And we need to move to a democratic coexistence. That is not feasible right now in Venezuela. If you speak against the government, you have to pay for the consequences. And that's why Leopoldo is in jail. And that's why Maria Corina is not in the Congress. And that's why I am here outside of Venezuela, because I have an order of arrest. You know what I'm saying? So we need to change that. We cannot accept that in the 21st century, the government discriminate you based on your ideas. And I wanted to be clear on this, in this other element. We have a resolution from the UN which is asking for the release of Leopoldo López. It's quite clear. The government had the opportunity to participate in that process. This is the first time that independent organization issue a release in favor of Leopoldo, in which the government had the opportunity to participate. They couldn't prove anything against Leopoldo. So the international community has to speak up without hesitation, asking for the release of Leopoldo. So that's what I'm asking about the international community, to protect and defend human rights, and in the case of Leopoldo, the release of Leopoldo without condition. About the economic situation, Wendy, I totally agree with you, and that's why I'm saying that the 2015 will be worse than this year. The oil prices went down. We don't have enough money in order to keep, the public spending. The oil prices should be around 120, 140 in order to preserve the current public spending. But the inflation is quite high. If you look, the inflation in food is close to 100, and that affects the poor people especially. So the inflation in next year will be even worse. That's why I'm saying that we could face a social conflictivity next year. Because, I mean, it's quite difficult to handle that situation. And now Maduro is weak, and he doesn't have the capacity to handle this situation. So that's why I think it's going to be worse. And we reduce our oil production in 500,000 barrels. We don't have the capacity to increase our production immediately, even in the short term, in the medium term. There is no capacity for that. We don't have the resources. We don't have the right people to conduct that. And the foreign investor, in my view, don't trust in the Venezuelan government. So if we look our history as a country, every time that we have high oil prices, the poverty, goes down. But then when the oil prices, goes down, the poverty again goes up. And we haven't saved any money from these oil highest prices that we have had in the past. We haven't saved any money. And now, in which we have difficult times, there's no resources from those revenues in order to, to have a smooth transition while we are now having low prices of the oil. So yes, we are in trouble. And that would affect mainly the poor people, because has been our history in this time is even worse than in the past. We repeated again the same error, the same mistake, but even worse this time. About the transition, as I said clear, yes, I think we have different approaches, and we have to wait for events in order to move forward and to have a target as a unitary platform. And I think people from the Chavismo Democrático will move. They understand the crisis. They understand that Venezuela cannot continue in the way it's conducted. In my view, the fight that we have in Venezuela is not between rich and poor, no, nor between left and right, no. It's between a population that suffers against an elite which is in power in order to preserve their privilege, their business. That's what we are facing right now. And that's why I think the supporters of the Chavismo, they understand that, and they will come together with us in order to find a way to move forward as a country. The last question about if the congressional election can be delayed. The government always has played with the date of the elections in Venezuela. It's not first time. So that could be also on the table. But you could think also about anticipating the election. Because if the things continue as it is, I mean, it will be even worse if you delay that election. Probably they could think, they can be discussing to anticipate the election instead of delaying the election. But always they have been playing with that issue, and that's why they control the electoral branch. So it could be something on the table. And why I'm talking about a potential presidential election and a constitutional assembly, that we have a presidential regime which is very, very, how can I say that, very restricted. It's not like a parliamentarian regime in which you can dissolve the Congress and call for a new election. Here you have to find a way within the Constitution when you have, problems, political problems in Venezuela. We have used this in the past. For example, when Carlos Andrés was in power, they found within the Constitution that using a trial, they could, take out the president at that time. So what I'm thinking about of this issue is that if we are going to face a social conflictivity, that the Venezuela situation cannot continue as it is right now, and because, in my view, also people inside of the Chavismo is thinking about moving Maduro from power and preserve the power, our constitution states that if that happens before within the first 4 years, you need to call for a new election. So I'm anticipating here a potential scenario due to the social conflictivity in which you have a crisis, and Maduro has, for example, has to resign, or the same Chavismo is asking Maduro for his resignation. So this is one of the scenarios that I could see due to this economic problem and social problem. Or it could be a constitutional assembly, because that's the way that Chavismo and the opposition can just bring again together, change the total system, reorder the game, and put a social path again as a democratic country in order to restore what I call the democratic coexistence. So, I mean, these are potential scenarios. And we need to have those on the table and be prepared for them.
Okay, we have time for just a couple more questions. If there are some additional hands. Over here, Steve.
Thank you, Cindy. Stephen Donahue. I thought it was really interesting to hear what you had to say, Carlos, about the potential for transition, and Jennifer, your thoughts, and especially Abe's intervention on how some of these things may have happened. And so, God willing, there will be such a transition at some point in the approximate future. But even under those circumstances, Carlos, what is a plan of government that could meet the expectations, some of which Jennifer talked about, the achievements that have been made, and given what Wendy talked about and you talked about with respect to the economy and the dwindling economy, how do you actually govern in a situation where you don't have any money?
Okay, perhaps one more, all the way in the back.
Hi. I would just like, if possible, for you to comment on the relationship between Venezuela and Cuba, and sort of what it was a bit during the Chavez administration, and how it's changing, or it will change in the future.
Okay, could you let us know who you are?
Yes, my name is Philip Kostopoulos. I'm affiliated with Yale University.
Okay. Why don't we take Carlos and then Jennifer, and we'll close. So consider this your final comment.
Okay. How to govern difficulties? That's what you are saying. I think when you go to an emergency room, you know what you are expecting. Just save the person. So it will be, in my view, easier to take some certain decisions. But the most important thing here is get together, part of the opposition and part of the Chavismo, and just build an agenda together. For example, let's be clear to increase our national production as a country, our economic capacity, which has been destroyed. I think the public sector and the private sector can be working together, and the state can just be in charge of certain things. Let's talk about the oil. Let's go to increase our oil production. We can do that. Let's talk about democratic rules. We need to respect human rights. We need to respect freedom of the speech. We need to restore what I said again, and I insist on this, the democratic coexistence. No more political discrimination. No more political discrimination. Let's exclude the military force out of the politics. You cannot build a country asking to the military force being part of your political party. So imagine here in the United States that Obama is asking the military force to be part of the Democratic Party. What would you think about that? That will be crazy, in my view. So we need to be clear on that. And at the end, how can we use mainly oil revenues in order to help the poor people, especially extreme poverty? So I think you can build an agenda with the Chavismo in order to overcome this difficult situation that we are facing as a country. About Cuba, we have been funding Cuba. 100,000 barrels per day to Cuba. So Cuba, you know that the first letter of support that Carlos Andrés received in 1992 when Chavez committed the coup d'etat against Carlos Andrés was from Fidel, saying, Carlos Andrés, you have all my entire support. He was against Chavez. But then Fidel saw what was happening in Venezuela. He didn't have any more, the Soviet Union. And he said, well, I need funding to end my life. So there's a guy down there called Chavez that he probably is very popular. He will win the election. So come to Cuba. So Cuba was thinking in Venezuela because of the funding, first thing. And the second one, he now has a strong political intervention in Venezuela. I don't have any doubt. The way that the illness of Chavez was handled, the way that Maduro is discussing with him all the political issues in Venezuela, I could say that they have a strong political intervention in Venezuela. So how will be the future with Cuba? We need to respect Cuba as a country. We need to help them to find the way of democracy. And we need to take out not only Cuba, any government from the political decision in Venezuela. The political decisions in our country have to be made by Venezuelans. And we need to treat all the countries with respect and with cooperation. And that's the way we should see the international relationship with Venezuela and the rest of the international community.
Jennifer.
Well, I don't have too much to add to what Carlos answered, but I do think that on the Cuban relationship, it does continue, as far as I know, a similar amount of the same number of advisors and healthcare workers and other Cubans in Venezuela is relatively the same as it was under Chavez. I do agree that not only Cuba, but much of the Caribbean and Central America who have been depending on discounted oil from Venezuela are concerned about the prospects for the future, and so therefore looking for alternatives. I think Cuba has definitely been looking for alternatives in terms of its own exploration of oil, which has not come to fruition in its deep sea, but looking for other kinds of partnerships as well to help it in the future.
Okay. I said it was the last question, but I can't resist, given Carlos's statement about removing any country from the internal political decisions of Venezuela. There is a new Senate that will be sworn in the United States in January. The Republican Party, I think, has been very much more activist in terms of what they want the U.S. government to do vis-a-vis the Maduro government. And I'd just be interested in your as well as Jennifer's take on what U.S. policy should be in this current situation. Carlos.
I think when each country has the right to take their own decision based on their laws, so I will respect that. But I want to make clear this statement. I mean, when we are talking about human rights, in my view, human rights has no nationality, has no borders, and has to be considered not only by the United States, it has to be considered by the entire international community. And in my view, they have to be very clear on that issue. And they need to act in order to find a way to respect human rights. And I'm talking about here the international community. I'm not talking about here one single nation. No, I'm talking about here the entire international community. So I will respect the decision that they will take based on their law. So I cannot just get any position on that. No, in saying that they have the right to do what they want based on the U.S. laws.
Okay, Jennifer.
I think we'll have to be careful to not fall into the trap of driving Venezuelan policy based on Cuban policy or anti-Cuban sentiment, which is strong within the U.S. Senate and may become stronger. It's a dilemma about how to pursue promotion and defense of human rights and democratic values in countries with whom we don't have good relations, and the problem of producing a counterproductive result, a rally around the flag, blaming the outsider for interference, etc., is always the possibility. I think the best thing that the U.S. can do is to continue to speak out strongly in terms of values and to work through the multilateral channels, the UN Human Rights Commission, the UN special task forces that were mentioned before, the task force on arbitrary detention, or the working group on arbitrary detention is the one that did put out the request for the release of Leopoldo López. Working through bodies like that and strengthening those bodies, as well in the Inter-American system, the Inter-American Commission, the Inter-American Court on Human Rights. The U.S. is in a somewhat difficult position on those in that it does not belong to the Inter-American Court on Human Rights and has not ratified the American Convention on Human Rights. And so it's difficult to push countries like Venezuela and others in that direction, when we do not participate ourselves. So that's somewhat of a dilemma. If we can address that right now, and if the U.S. can continue to participate in the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and also respect its own resolutions. Right now there's a dispute between the U.S. and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, for example. And so the more we can be consistent in our policies and participating in these international defense mechanisms, the stronger position we'll have to persuade others to participate in them and respect them. And we'll have a more credible voice to defend those rights, which are very, very important, and to gather others from the hemisphere and throughout the hemisphere to defend them as well.
Please join me in thanking Carlos Vecchio, Jennifer McCoy.
Thank you very much.
Vivian. Thanks. Ciao, Jennifer. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.